The bell above the door chimed once, soft, tired, like it too had aged with the building. My shop had been here for as long as anyone could remember, wedged between an old bakery and a boarded-up theater no one dared to reopen. People passed by on their way to newer places, clean, bright, soulless places. But some still wandered in, mostly the curious, the lonely, the ones who looked like they needed to be forgotten. Antique shops attract that kind. I'd inherited the place from my father. He disappeared when I was a teenager, just never came home one night. No signs, no note, just gone. I took over because no one else would, and maybe because part of me thought he'd come back. He never did. The shop never changed. Shelves of yellowed books, warped furniture, clocks that refused to tick. And in the far back corner, behind dust-streaked glass, stood the girl. About 8 inches tall, porcelain, wearing a faded blue dress with tiny white buttons and a black ribbon in her sculpted hair. She stood alone in the case. I never moved her, never dusted her. But somehow she never collected dust. People asked if she was for sale. I always said no. I didn't know why. I couldn't. It was the eyes, I think. Not painted. Glass. Too real. Like someone had trapped a child's gaze inside ceramic. Sometimes, when the shop was quiet, I'd swear I saw them follow me. But I never questioned it. You don't question things you've lived with long enough. You just fold them into the wallpaper of your life. Until one morning, last November, when I unlocked the store and walked in early, before the sun had finished rising, I noticed something odd. The girl in the window was no longer facing forward. She was turned, slightly, just enough to look toward the counter, toward where I stood.
I stared at the glass case for a long time, telling myself the obvious things, that maybe I'd brushed against it without noticing. The building had shifted again. Old floorboards were prone to warping. That maybe I was just tired. But I couldn't look away. She wasn't just turned. Her head had tilted ever so slightly, enough that the sunlight coming through the front window caught the edges of her eyeglass, reflecting back at me like a flicker of thought. I approached the case slowly. The girl didn't move. Of course not. But the feeling, that feeling you get when someone watches you in a silent room, wrapped around me like cold fabric. I checked the latch, still locked, the glass unbroken, no sign of tampering. I reached up, fingers trembling slightly, and adjusted her back to the center. There, normal again. But the air didn't settle. It still felt wrong. I stepped behind the counter, opened the old logbook, and forced myself into routine. Inventory, repair notes, orders. And then I saw it. A handwritten note in the margin of the last page. Not mine. Not in my handwriting. You turned her. She doesn't like that. I blinked. The ink was fresh. I looked around the shop expecting, what, a prank? A customer hiding? Nothing. Silence except for the tick of the grandfather clock that hadn't worked in years. I tore out the page and crumpled it, tossed it in the bin. Then, after some hesitation, I covered the glass case with a linen cloth. Out of sight, out of mind. But the next morning, the cloth was folded neatly on the floor, and the girl was facing the counter again. Only this time, her mouth was slightly open.
Porcelain doesn't change. That's what I told myself as I leaned in to look, not too close, but close enough to be certain. Her mouth had been closed before. It had. I would have noticed, would have remembered. Now it was parted, just slightly. No teeth, no tongue, just the dark, shallow curve of something that should have been sculpted shut. I didn't touch her this time, didn't adjust her, didn't speak. I just backed away and left the shop early that day. Locked up, didn't even flip the open sign. I told myself I needed sleep. Maybe I was finally cracking. Years alone in a shop filled with the belongings of the dead could do that. Or maybe it was the weather. Damp November air always pulled at my nerves. But when I got home, something wouldn't leave me. Not fear, guilt, like I'd done something wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my chair by the window and stared into the dark, thinking about her, about how still she'd been all these years, about how she was always there before I inherited the store, before I could even remember. In fact, I couldn't remember a time she wasn't in that case. Even in my father's day, she was there, always there. I remembered once, I couldn't have been more than 8, walking into the shop after school and seeing him standing by the case, crying. I'd asked him what was wrong. He'd said, "Don't ever talk to her. That's all. Just don't talk to her." I thought he meant it as a joke, a strange adult warning. Now, sitting there in the stillness of my apartment, I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I returned early. The shop was silent, the windows fogged, but as I stepped inside, I heard something I hadn't heard in years, the ticking of the grandfather clock, and beneath that, a whisper, so soft it could have been breath. "You remember now." The whisper vanished as soon as I stepped further into the shop. I stood there for a long time, listening, trying to convince myself it had been the wind, or my own thoughts spoken too loud inside my skull. But the air was too heavy for coincidence. I approached the case. The girl was still, her face serene, mouth closed again. That almost made it worse. I considered calling someone, but who do you call to report that your doll is gaslighting you? Instead, I unlocked the case, the first time in years, and gently lifted her out. She was heavier than she looked, cold but not ceramic cold. Her skin had a strange texture, not smooth, almost soft. I sat her on the counter. She didn't move. Of course not. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting. So I did something I hadn't done since I was a boy. I spoke to her. "Who are you?" Silence. Why are you here? Still nothing. But I felt something then, not a voice in the air, but one inside me. A sensation, a memory, something brushed across the surface of my thoughts. My father, in this very shop, talking to someone behind the counter, but no one else was there. I blinked it away. The shop door opened suddenly, a breeze rushing in. A young woman, mid-20s, pale, tired eyes. She wandered in, hesitated near the girl on the counter. "She's beautiful." I nodded. "Not for sale." The woman looked confused. I didn't ask. Then she stared longer than she should have. A minute, maybe more. Her expression shifted from admiration to unease, and then fear. She turned without a word and left. As soon as the door closed, I looked back at the girl. She was now sitting exactly where she'd been before, back inside the case, and the logbook, still open on the desk, now had a second line of unfamiliar handwriting. "You spoke to her. That's all it takes." I tore the page from the logbook and threw it away without reading it again. But I remembered every word. "You spoke to her. That's all it takes." The phrase dug into me like a splinter beneath the skin, something too deep to pull out cleanly. That night, I dreamt of her. Not the porcelain girl, but a real child, flesh and breath, standing barefoot on the cold floor of my shop, staring up at me with eyes too old for her face. I knelt beside her and asked her name. She leaned in close and whispered, "You already know." I woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The apartment was ice cold. It was 3 a.m. I dressed and walked to the shop without even thinking. The streets were empty, not a single light in the windows. The kind of quiet that feels unnatural, like the whole world is holding its breath. I unlocked the door. The bell didn't ring. The shop was exactly as I'd left it, and yet not. The clocks were ticking, all of them. The radio in the back room buzzed with static, though I hadn't turned it on in years. And the glass case stood open, empty.
My chest tightened. Then I saw her, sitting in the child's rocking chair we kept by the fireplace display. Perfect posture, hands folded, face tilted toward me, like she'd been expecting my arrival. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She rocked once, twice, then stopped and said, with a voice that shouldn't have existed in the room, "Would you like to remember, or would you rather forget?" I backed away. My heel struck something. Turning around, I saw it. A mirror I hadn't seen before. Ornate, old, cracked at the corners. In it, I saw myself,
But I wasn't alone. Standing just behind me was the little girl. Not porcelain, not pale. Alive, smiling, holding my father's watch.
I spun around, heart hammering. The room was empty. No girl, no watch, no whisper of movement. Just me, the mirror, and a growing sense that I was stepping into something I'd already walked through once before. I stared at the mirror again. It wasn't part of my shop's inventory. I knew that. I knew every item, every crack in the floorboard, every scuff on every shelf. This mirror wasn't mine. And yet, the wood, the design, it looked familiar. Too familiar. I leaned closer. There were names carved into the frame, small, etched deep, almost hidden in the grain. At the top, Edgar, my father's name. Below that, Harold, Vincent, Elise, Marla, all in the same jagged hand. I didn't recognize the others, but I knew they were names of people who'd owned this shop before me. Or maybe people who had been owned by it. The shop wasn't mine. It never had been. It was hers. I looked toward the rocking chair. Empty again. But the case in the back no longer was. Inside, behind the glass, sat not just the girl, but two others. One looked like the young woman from the day before. The other... My throat closed. It was my father. Not perfectly sculpted, not lifelike, but unmistakable. His eyes, his stance, his watch on his wrist. I staggered back, almost tripping over a box of record sleeves. Then the girl, the one I knew, the one with the ribbon and the cold eyes, turned her head slowly toward me inside the case. Her lips parted again. And though the room remained silent, I heard her inside my thoughts. You fed me once. Now, feed me again. I don't remember leaving the shop that night. I just remember blinking, and suddenly I was home, sitting on the edge of my bed, still dressed, shoes damp from the cold sidewalk. There was dirt on my hands, dust under my fingernails. The smell of old wood and burnt wax clung to me like a memory I didn't make. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I stared at my door and waited for dawn as if sunlight could make it all untrue. It didn't. When I returned to the shop the next day, everything looked normal. The rocking chair was empty. The mirror was gone. Only the girl sat in the case, alone, pristine, mouth closed. No father. No stranger beside her. No other figures at all. I nearly convinced myself it had all been a hallucination until I looked in the logbook again. New handwriting, thin, precise. The others faded. You didn't feed them. I slammed it shut. Enough. I pulled the cloth from the supply room and covered the case again, this time taping it down, sealing every edge. I locked the display, turned the sign to closed, killed the lights. I sat behind the counter for hours. Then I heard it. Knocking. From inside the case. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I didn't move. Then 3 more. Not urgent, just patient. I turned on the security cameras, something I rarely used. Black and white feeds flickered onto the monitor. And there she was. Not in the case, standing at the center of the shop. Still, hands folded, eyes locked on the counter. My hands shook. I reached to rewind the feed. The footage was gone. Nothing recorded. Just static. Then the screen went black, and in its reflection, I saw her standing right behind me.
I spun in my chair, lungs frozen, but again, nothing. No sound. No movement. Just the familiar shadows of my shop swallowing the corners of the room like always. But my reflection had seen her. It wasn't just fear now, it was certainty. I was being watched. Not by some spirit, not from some distant plane. No, she was here. In the room. Moving when I didn't. Existing behind the seams of things. And I'd let her out. Or maybe she'd never been in. That night, I did what any man trying to rationalize his collapse might do. I drank. I poured a glass of bourbon, stared at the blank TV in my apartment, and tried to recall when the girl first appeared, not just in the shop, in my life. Was it when I was a child? Earlier? Had she always been there? There was one memory. I was maybe 5, sitting behind the counter while my father restocked books, a thunderstorm outside, dim yellow light in the shop. She was already in the case then, but she turned her head and looked directly at me. No one believed me. I told my father. He slapped the table and shouted, "Never say that again." I never did. Until now. I fell asleep in the chair, glass still in hand, and dreamt. This time, I wasn't in the shop. I was inside the case, cold, frozen, unable to move or speak, watching the shop around me play in reverse, customers entering, dust flying upward, voices echoing backward, and in front of the case, the girl. Real. Alive. Watching. She whispered, "You're learning." When I woke, my face was damp. I had been crying, and on the wall beside me, in something that looked too dark to be ink, were the words, "She lets you forget until she doesn't." The handwriting on the wall was gone by morning. Not erased, just gone. As if it had never been there. Like the girl, like my father. I didn't open the shop that day. I wandered instead through the back alleys of Sleepy Hollow, past the old rail station,
the abandoned textile mill, the rusted-out cars in the woods behind Orchard Street. All places from my childhood, all still, rotting under time. I ended up at the town library, dustier than I remembered. I asked the librarian for old property records, specifically about my shop. She gave me a tired look, but brought out a stack of manila folders that smelled like mold and fire. The address went back over 100 years. Different names, different owners, same shop. I recognized one. Harold Greeley, a man my father had once muttered about when drunk, said he didn't last long. Then Elise Morwin, a woman who, according to an old news clipping, had vanished without a trace in her storefront. One file had a photo, black and white, creased and blurry. And in the corner of that photo, the case. Same glass, same frame. And inside it, a doll. I leaned in. Not exactly the same girl, but close. Porcelain, black ribbon, eyes just a bit too knowing. I flipped the page. Another photo, newer, from the late 70s. A man behind the counter. I recognized the watch, my father's. But the face was blurred, like the camera couldn't hold on to it. And in the case, she was there again. Only now, she was smiling. Not painted, not sculpted, just smiling. I snapped a photo of the files, returned the folders, and left without a word. Back at the shop, I didn't turn on the lights, just stood in the dark, watching the case. And then her voice came again, not in the air, but in my head, soft as silk and cold as winter glass. You're next, aren't you?
I didn't answer her. Not because I was brave, but because part of me was starting to accept it. Maybe I was next. Maybe I'd always been next. The case looked different now. Not just physically, something in the air around it. Like the temperature dropped 2 degrees the closer I stood. Like the walls bent slightly inward, drawn toward her. She didn't move, didn't blink, but I could feel her pulling. That night, I locked the doors, not just the shop, but every drawer, cabinet, cupboard, even the windows. It was ridiculous. She wasn't coming through any of those. Still, I locked them. And then I sat with a tape recorder and began to speak the story out loud. I thought, if I document this, if I say it all in my voice, maybe I can hold on to myself. The tape hissed softly as I spoke. I told it about the shop, about my father, the girl, the notes, the dreams, the mirror, the names in the frame. I told it everything. The moment I stopped recording, the lights flickered. And then the tape rewound itself, fast, hissing. I didn't press anything. It stopped at the beginning, then played. Only it wasn't my voice, it was hers. And she said, "You always tell the story. That's the point. They always do." I lunged forward, ripped the tape out, smashed it under my heel. But the hissing didn't stop. I turned. The radio in the back room was on again. No static this time,
just soft music from another era. And over it, layered like a breath, your voice is mine now. I shut it off. Silence. Then, a knock at the door. Late. Past closing. I hesitated, approached slowly. Outside stood a little girl. Not porcelain, not glass-eyed. Real. She smiled and pointed past me through the window at the display case. Then she whispered something I barely heard. She says, "Thank you."
I didn't let the child in. I couldn't. My hands wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring at her through the glass. She didn't knock again, didn't speak, just smiled, turned, and walked into the fog. But that smile, it wasn't hers. I recognized it. It was the same as the girl in the case. The same exact curl of the lips. The same hollow sweetness. The next morning, I awoke at the counter, though I didn't remember falling asleep there. I was holding something. My father's watch. Still ticking. Still warm. I dropped it instinctively and backed away, only to find myself staring into the case again. Inside was the girl, as always. But beside her now was a photograph. It hadn't been there before. A black and white picture, a boy, maybe 6 years old, standing outside the shop, smiling. Me, clutching a small wrapped box in his hands, the same size as the glass doll now sitting in the case. A birthday? A gift? I didn't remember. The door behind me creaked. I turned. Nothing. But when I looked back at the case, the photo was gone. In its place, a small slip of paper, handwritten, familiar ink. You gave her to me. That's why she chose you. Something inside me cracked. I stumbled backward, palms slick with sweat, vision blurring. In my head, I heard her laugh, not cruel, not loud, soft, like a lullaby sung underwater. I reached for the phone, but the line was dead. No dial tone, no static, only a whisper. You fed me then, you'll feed me now.
I left the shop, or I tried to. The moment I stepped outside, the air felt wrong, too quiet, like I'd entered a photograph instead of a street. No wind, no birds, no sound. Just the faint creaking of the shop door slowly closing behind me on its own. I walked past the bakery, past the abandoned theater, past everything familiar, but the town looked off. The angles of buildings slightly warped, windows too small, shadows that didn't match the sun.
I circled the block once, twice, and came back to the shop. I hadn't meant to. I'd walked away. But there it was again, standing in front of me, like it had always been, like it would always be. The sign in the window now read, "Welcome back." I went inside. This time, no bell. The air had changed. Heavier, stiller. Everything was dim, even though I hadn't turned the lights off. The shop felt stretched, deeper than it should have been, like the walls had pulled back to make room for something else. The case sat at the far end, illuminated by a shaft of grayish light. She was waiting. But she wasn't alone. Figures lined the shelves now, porcelain, glass, wood, dozens of them, all childlike, all still. Some looked eerily familiar. One of them wore my father's watch. Another held a small camera, just like the one I'd used as a boy. I turned to run, but the door was gone. Only shelves. Shelves and shelves, stretching into the dark. The girl turned her head, no subtlety this time. Her mouth opened wider than before, and inside, I didn't see darkness. I saw faces, all looking out, all screaming silently. I fell to my knees, and her voice whispered from everywhere at once. "You brought them to me. Now you stay." I don't know how long I stayed there, on my knees, staring into the open case. Minutes, hours. The light in the shop never changed. It was neither day nor night anymore, just a constant dead glow, like time itself had stopped moving forward. Or maybe it was only moving for her. I stood, finally, legs weak, breathing shallow. The case was now empty. No girl, no dolls, no faces. Only a mirror, tall, narrow, arched like a doorway, leaned inside where the girl had once been. I stepped closer. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just myself, older, worn, pale. But then, the reflection changed. My mouth didn't move when I did. My eyes blinked too slowly. My head turned just slightly out of sync with my body. And then the mirror version of me smiled. That same slow, knowing smile I'd seen on the girl, on the child outside the shop, on the photo in the case. It was her smile. I stumbled back, but the mirror stayed, not reflecting, just showing what it wanted. And now it showed me behind the glass, standing still, hands folded, eyes cold. Then her voice returned, but not inside my head this time. It came from within my mouth. She spoke through me. "You are part of the story now. You always were." My hands moved on their own, reaching for the counter, pulling out the logbook. I watched, helpless, as I wrote a name I didn't choose. Mine. One more etched soul on the list. I tried to scream, to run, to resist, but I was already fading. The shelves were changing around me again. Dust receded, wood polished, The shop renewed itself, reborn, waiting for the next lost soul to come wandering in.
The strangest part was how peaceful it felt to let go, to stop fighting. I could still see, though not with my eyes. I could still hear, though not with my ears. Everything passed through me like wind through hollow glass. The shop moved in slow rhythm now. Visitors came and went. Most ignored the case. Some didn't. A few lingered too long, peered in too closely, spoke to her. And each time I felt her stir beside me, felt her hunger, not for food, for attention, for memory, for recognition. She fed on their curiosity, on the little cracks in their minds. And when one was ready, truly ready, she took them, not loudly, not violently, quietly, just absorbed them into the stillness. I watched a woman with red hair disappear mid-sentence. Watched a child stare too long, then blink and become porcelain. No one outside noticed. No police, no panic. Because she didn't take their bodies. She took what made them real. Their selves, their stories, their souls. And those of us who remained inside the case, behind the glass, on the shelves, we watched. We waited. And sometimes we remembered flickers of who we were. A father, a boy, a shopkeeper, a son. Sometimes the memories came in dreams. Sometimes in flickers of movement. And sometimes when the shop was empty and the light was dim, I could almost feel my lips move. I fed her. I watched her grow. I helped her become what she is.
I was the first, wasn't I? I was the one who gave her shape, the one who brought her the box, the one who opened the door not just to the shop, but to her.
The shop stands as it always has, timeless, dustless, waiting. People walk by without seeing it until she wants them to. Then suddenly they stop, turn, step inside. She draws them in with a feeling, not fear, not curiosity, something deeper, recognition, like they've been here before, like something they lost is inside, and she gives it to them, or pretends to. A whisper, a flicker, a glance. They come closer to the case, and then they don't leave. Some say the shop is cursed, others say it's abandoned. But those who truly see it, those who feel it, can't resist the pull. She's stronger now, more complete, because I told the story, because I remembered, and with each telling she becomes more real, more rooted, less shadow, more shape. Every word spoken gives her weight. And now I sit behind the glass, a fixture. Sometimes I see myself reflected in the case, my face warped, hollow, still trying to scream. Other times I see others join us, familiar eyes, new voices. We don't speak, we don't move, but inside we all share the same echo, a thought that turns over and over like a broken wheel. I fed her once, I watched her become, and now I am the story she tells others. She stands in the center now, not in the case. The case is for us. And every time the bell rings over the shop door, we pray the next one won't be a child. But she always prefers children. They believe longer, they break easier, and they never remember who closed the door behind them.